Welcome to Living History with Ted Goldsboro. Our guest today is Colette Speakman, a graduate of Merion High School in the class of 1984. Today we're going to be talking about the Merion Tribute House, where Colette is the manager. So we'll be talking about the history and how the building has been used throughout history. Colette, let's place welcome and thank you for coming today. Let's place where it is.
Sure. The Merion Tribute House is on Hazelhurst Avenue in Merion. It's right down the street from the St. Charles Seminary. So if you're on Wynwood Road, you may see a little sign pointing in that direction. It's about 3 blocks down. It's in a residential neighborhood.
Could one take the train to a function there?
Absolutely. We're about 2 blocks from the Merion train station, and we have had brides leave their receptions and go onto the train to go home.
Okay. Where the structure is today, what was there before?
Yes, it was the original estate of Eldridge Johnson, who was the president of the Victor Talking Machine Company, later RCA, and he had an estate called the Chimneys there in Merion, and it was apparently a very grand building, part of the Baird estate, I believe, and it had 24 foot high ceilings and polished oak, polished floors, magnificent structure. And he lived there for many years and did many additions to it. And actually the architect to the Tribute House did one of the additions to that building.
There's a picture I have of Eldridge Johnson. Appears to be a very handsome man.
Yes, self-made man back in the day, I believe.
How did he happen to donate his land, and what happened to the mansion?
Well, after World War I, there was a lot of national pride, a lot of statues and monuments going on all over the country. It was the Great War, and the war to end all wars. They were hoping it would, this would be a peace memorial. And if any of the viewers are familiar with Downton Abbey, in the last season of Downton Abbey, they do talk about doing a war memorial in their little village. I think Lord Grantham is a little put out that the butler is put in charge of that effort. But a similar kind of feel, that this was the end of the war and everyone was happy that peace was upon the lands. And there were lots, you'll see a lot of monuments all over, the city and all over the country about World War I. And originally, the Civic Association decided they wanted to do a similar memorial. I think it was originally intended to be sort of a clock tower or some sort, just a monument. And then Mr. Johnson had a son who fought in World War I. And so it was a very, close to his heart cause. He decided instead maybe that there should be a venue, a place that the community could use, a neighborhood park. It would be not only a meeting place for the neighborhood, but maybe some playgrounds, tennis courts, ice skating rink. There were all kinds of grand plans at the time. And he sort of challenged the community to help raise the funds for it. So at the time, they decided the community decided that the number of 81,000 should be the amount that the community should pull together.
This is in the 1920s.
And this was in the 1920s, yes. And that was for the 81 men from Merion who fought in the war. And so he stepped in. I think they floundered a little bit in that fundraising effort. He had to step in a couple of times to help increase the funds available. He donated, as you said, his house, had it demolished, donated the land, and then helped raise the rest of the money for the Merion Tribute House. We
should mention that the Victor Talking Machine was where? The company?
That was located in Camden, and that's where his plant was. So after he didn't have a house to live in anymore in Merion, he actually did move over to New Jersey to be closer to the plant.
Okay, good.
He and his wife.
Were any parts of his mansion used in the new structure?
Yes, there were some balustrades were placed on as part of the terrace. The original gardens, Mrs. Eldridge was a big gardener, and the original gardens were magnificent and were part of the donated estate. Unfortunately, after the Depression and that they sort of withered away. Unfortunately, it would be lovely to have something like that back, but so there are still some old walls and balustrades you can see back there that were part of her gardens as well. And the original, the lintel, I believe,
lintel,
to the
is that over the
yes,
doorway?
over the doorway.
Okay.
Was
Big stone.
It was a big stone. It's a big stone. Yes, on top of the doorway of the Tribute House was an original, I believe, stepping stone into their original house.
Another prominent Merionite was Edward Bach.
Edward Bach, yes.
And he, I think, was Danish. I can't remember.
Dutch-born,
Dutch-born, thank you. And he married a Curtis, and she was quite young. I think she was only 16 or something when he married her. But she was connected, or she formed the Curtis Institute of Music.
Yes.
He was, well, and they also had the Curtis Publishing Company, which was a big deal in Philadelphia. And so I think Eldridge Johnson and Bach were the two most prominent names in Merion, and I believe that Bach helped also raise some money.
He did, and it was his original idea. The whole clock tower idea was his. So getting something started was his idea.
Okay.
He was very, instrumental in forming the Civic Association, which was one of the first civic associations in the country.
We have street signs that we attribute to Bach.
Right.
And there were, let me see what else. There were some other.
The light poles.
Oh, the lights. Thank you. We're going to see a picture of one of those lights. Thank you. We have a few pages of history here, and I underlined some things that I wondered if it's worth talking about.
Okay. Yes, there was a new organization started when he donated his land and this project got started. The Civic Association had been sort of in control at that point. They decided they needed a new entity, which they called the Merion Community Association in 1919, and he was the honorary president, Eldridge Johnson, after that gift was made by him. So that entity was put in charge of the Tribute House and the grounds and the upkeep. And those two organizations, of course, still exist today. Do you want to go through the...
well, it's up to you.
Okay.
Okay. This is, I think, after the building might have been completed?
Yes.
Okay.
This is kind of the highlights of some of the building. It was... As I said, it was intended for community meetings, lectures, concerts. There was a movie projector placed up there. A big pipe organ was part of the gift. So it is well fitted out for parties and events even today because the rooms are a little bigger, than an old house may have, and there is a large ballroom for different functions. This kind of mentions there's three front rooms, the Memorial Hall, which is the big tower that you see right away as you're driving up, and that has a lot of the insignias of World War I. The major battles that Americans fought in are listed along the walls, and a big tower with a balcony that people can access to say hello to guests or whatnot. There's a middle room, the lounge, which was used for teas, and a little more feminine touch, some upholstered furniture and sort of more comfortable furniture in there. And then the Legion room, which was dedicated to the Legion post of the area. It is still used by the American Legion today for their meetings. And that was a little more masculine with some, heavy wood Adirondack chairs and kind of very arts and crafts style furniture in there. And then what was intended as the auditorium, now we call it the ballroom because it has a little bit more of that function these days. But the auditorium was the main room, which they claimed could seat 375 people if needed.
Maybe they were smaller. Anyway.
I believe they must have been smaller people back then.
The organ's gone.
The organ, some of the pipes remain underneath
I
in the
see.
basement, but yeah, it is
Okay.
gone. Mhm.
All right. Now, eventually, we're going to be getting to some pictures here.
Sure.
We've been doing quite a bit of talking, but
Talking,
maybe, is there anything in here that's worth mentioning?
Well, it was done, it was very important at the time for this to be built in the arts and crafts style. So everything was brought to the site and built right there on the site by hand. So that was in the 20s, that was the you'll see arts and crafts artwork, and the handiwork kind of was very important in that style. So everything was done, as I said, the stone was hewn on hand, all the woodwork was done by hand on site. So, and it's a magnificent building. To look at it now, it's hard to imagine, much building it, much less building it all by hand on site. So
We have about a minute left before we take our first break. I wondered where the workmen lived. Maybe they were in tents, or how many craftsmen there were, stone carvers.
Right. That I believe they were all fairly local craftsmen. I don't know exactly.
Yeah.
I don't know if they. I don't believe I've ever read that they lived on site during the work.
I think we better move on because I want to show some images.
Sure.
And we've got about a minute left before we have to take a break. I wanted to point out that the Lower Merion Historical Society on their website has images and a description. And it's time for us to take our first break, but we'll be back after we take a short break. This is Ted Goldsboro of Living History talking to Colette Speakman, the manager of the Merion Tribute House in Merion, Pennsylvania.